Hello, hello, my peeps, and welcome back. Hola, buenas noches, buenas tardes, buenos días. It's the Chancleta Generation Podcast, guys. As you all know by now, I am Clemencia, and I'm the founder of Moira Studio, which is an advertising agency that specializes in communicating with Latinos in the U.S. And my lovely Latinos, Latinas, and Latines, we are starting a new season of this podcast, season 9. I can't even believe that we've gotten this far. And, as you all know, we're starting it in some turbulent and chaotic times for us Latinos. I know some of you may be worried, maybe scared about the future. There's maybe some uncertainty that you may be feeling. I know I felt some of these feelings. But if you know me by now, you know that I don't stay quiet. So I want to say that we're here, that we see you, that we are you, and that we're going to do our best to uplift us and still tell our stories, be a resource, be any assistance or help that we can be. Don't despair. We are here. So we are going to dedicate many of these episodes to talk about topics that are current and that are important to our community. If you or any one of you thinks that they have something important to share, please reach out to me at clem@chancletageneration.com. Let's uplift all of us. All right. So got that out of the way. And with that, let's start with saying that Latino immigrants have become a topic of conversation in the political realm. And they've almost become a political football. We're here to say right now that that's not the case. That these are people, that these are humans with amazing stories that deserve to be told. So to help us start talking about these stories, we have Dennis Garcia with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Clemencia, for having me today. It's an honor and privilege to be your guest, and I want to thank you for your opening comments.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you as well. So, more about Dennis. So Dennis Garcia is an award-winning author, retired attorney, and storyteller whose work celebrates Latina resilience and cultural legacy. Yes, love that. His latest books, Las Madres Latinas in the Heartland Who Led Their Family to Success, honors 4 generations of Latina women who shaped their communities in the Midwest. Drawing from his personal family history, Dennis's storytelling blends history, identity, and inspiration, offering a powerful tribute to the strength of Latino families. I love this. So I'm super excited to talk about this book because I'm so curious to know what is it that inspired you to write a book about women.
Well, I think the most one of the most important things was that I am one of 10 children in my family. 7 of my siblings were female. So I was the 5th child. So I had big sisters above me, 6 sisters below me in age, and of course my wonderful grandmother. Excuse me, I had written a previous book about my first cousin on the Garcia side of the family. And when I started to do the research for that book, I soon began to hear and discover stories about my mother's family, and in particular, the women in my mother's family. And as I learned about their experiences in life, I began to realize that theirs was a dynamic story, much more exciting than my primo in the first book, much more dynamic, much more in depth. And so I realized from hearing all the stories and in doing research how difficult their lives were, and yet they overcame. And so I wanted to do the research and found out how they lived their lives and how they did, in fact, lead my family to success. And so that is how I got started.
I love that. And so you are from the Midwest?
Yes, I'm from Kansas, right in the dead center of the country.
Love it. When we were preparing for this episode, we were talking about how usually people hear about Latino stories in the Eastern Seaboard, Florida, New York, or in the West, like California, or the South, Texas. But there's not that many stories about Latinos in the Midwest.
That's correct. I think most people don't realize that the railway system, the railroads in the United States, they go from, let's say, Chicago on the east to Los Angeles on the west. Mm-hmm. Most of those railroad tracks and that system, the work for that system, that infrastructure, was done by Mexicanos, people from Mexico, men from Mexico who brought their families. The railroads had a specific policy that they wanted men and families from Mexico. This was approximately 1900, 1910. The railroad companies would send recruiters into Mexico and look for families and men willing to come to work. And during the course of the first 50 years of this development of the railroads, 1900 to 1950, thousands of Mexicans were brought to work specifically for the railroad. And on my mother's side, my great-grandmother and great-grandfather arrived about 1910. Mm. And if you were to take a train ride on what Amtrak today they call it,
yeah.
If you took it from Los Angeles all the way to Chicago, you would go through Kansas, and you would see communities of Mexicanos the entire way.
Oh, wow.
And their stories, their experiences are unknown, unheralded. And as an attorney and a teacher, I also taught for 16 years. I felt compelled to have their story made known to the community, both communities, Mexican and non-Mexican. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that nobody was going to write that story, I thought then I need to do that. So that was my inspiration.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about the fact that Latinos helped build this country, we're talking about in a literal way. It's not like in a, emotional, sentimental, or like sort of metaphorical. We're talking about literally. People came and put down a railroad that communicated a lot of the country, brought some gold across the country, and made the economy prosper, made the country prosper. These are all, stories that many people don't know about that are important because, it does give you the sense that, we were part of building this country.
We made a huge contribution in building the railroad infrastructure. And you have to remember that the economic success of the United States was built on this ability to ship goods, commerce, and people from one end of the country to the other. And it was the railway that did that. Mm. That way the farmers and the ranchers in the West and Midwest get their animals to processing plants. Mm-hmm. It was a way for the farmers to take their crops and get them to the big cities. It was key to economic success. And the contribution that the Mexican families made to this effort has not really been recognized. Mm. And so that was also part of the story that comes out in Las Madres.
Mm. Love that. And so what happens to these women? They come I assume the men are working on the railroad, and then.
Well, from the pages and stories in Las Madres, my great-grandmother was born in central Mexico, Aguascalientes, which is pretty much towards the center of the country.
Mm-hmm.
She was born and raised there in the 1860s. By 1910, the Mexican Revolution was underway. Families, poor families, campesinos, were getting caught in the middle. The rebel forces wanted soldiers. The federal government's forces, the federales, they wanted soldiers. And what did happen on occasion is if the young boys and young men refused to fight for one side or the other, they would get killed to prevent them from going to the other side. My great-grandmother lost a number of children in childbirth, and she said that she had enough of losing children, so she demanded that my great-grandfather, to take them to a safe place out of the way of the armies. So they went to El Paso and into Juarez. And then from there, my great-grandfather went to work for the Santa Fe Railroad, and he ended up being shipped to Dodge City, Kansas in the Midwest. That same Dodge City that you see about in the movies and on TV. That's where the family was sent. When my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather arrived in Dodge City, this was about 1910, there was no electricity, there was no running water, there was no paved roads. Initially, some of the men lived in tents.
Oh, wow. And it's cold over there.
Yes,
oh
absolutely. Absolutely. And there are stories of men losing their limbs and fingers and feet because they were out in the snow and not properly protected. The women did the best they could. The men tried to build shanties, little houses made of throwaway wood that the railroad didn't want anymore, and build these little houses for their families. My great-grandmother went into one of these shanties. They had a potbelly stove, and they lived on the edge of the tracks. They had to walk by foot to get supplies into town, and she had to cook the meals, take care of the children, do the laundry, all of that work without any electricity, dirt floors, no lighting except by lantern.
Oh, man.
So this is 1910, 1920, and they're still using lanterns. So these women, strong and with a strong commitment to taking care of the kids, they did the best they could. They tried to keep their men in working order to get out, go work, bring in the money for food. They did not get paid very much. The women planted gardens to help supplement their diet. And so 24/7, every day, and they were responsible for the family. And I think one of the amazing things that I point out in Las Madres is that if you ask those children who are still alive today, who are in the 20s and 30s, if you talk about their lives in the Mexican work camp, they would say, we were happy. We didn't know we were so poor. And I think that's a tribute to how comfortable and safe the women made those kids. So it wasn't until 1940 that my mother's family was able to move out of the work camp across to the other side of the tracks and move into Dodge City with regular housing.
Oh, wow. That really speaks to, that sounds like a really tough life. And, that really speaks to the strength of like, okay, I'm going through stuff, but my children are not gonna see any of it, or at least feel any of it,
Yes.
I'm gonna be that buffer for them.
Yes. And frankly, another aspect of their they did as parent was deal with the husband or male of the house. I wish I could say that all the men behaved appropriately and consumed alcohol to the moderate amounts, but sometimes the men in the family, yes, they supported the family, but they were also a big problem, a big hassle to deal with daily. And like I say, not all of them, of course, but there were a few. And another problem that came from living in that circumstance was a lot of men came without wives. And so the families had to take care of the young girls.
Oh, man.
Because the men were anxious to marry them or run off with them when they were ages 14, 15 in that arena. So that was a difficult challenge for a lot of women who wanted their daughters to not have to live such difficult lives as they did.
I mean, those stories are like across the board, right? It's not just
Yes.
Mexican men. Anybody
Yes,
that has
it's across
watched
the
any
board.
Western movies knows that
Yes.
every man back then was like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And they had to
Apparently
guard the
are so
girls
today.
and all of that.
Yes, exactly. So that was one of the challenges that they faced.
Wow. So it's kind of an interesting because it's not just your grandmother, right? You're talking about
Correct.
3 different generations of women.
Yes. My great grandmother was born in 1865 in Aguascalientes, in that area. My grandmother, she was born shortly after my great grandmother Candelaria had reached El Paso. So my grandmother was born in 1906, and she was a United States citizen.
Mm-hmm.
So in our family, we are already on our 6th generation of American born.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mother was born in Dodge City in a wooden shack under candlelight on a dirt floor with midwives, no doctors. She was born in 1920. So Las Madres tracks each of their lives. Of course, there was some time when they were both living, but it tracks each of their lives and the challenges they faced.
That's incredible. That must have been a huge research undertaking on your behalf.
Yes, it was. I wrote most of it during COVID. And I have to thank my wife, Celeste, who did a large amount of the research into public records, birth certificates, divorces, newspapers. And so she had a big contribution to the book. And the book has about 36 pictures in it. And those pictures...
you even have pictures.
Yeah, the pictures came from my first cousin, Micaela Rodriguez Judd. Micaela is approaching 80 now.
Wow.
And so...
Were they those pose pictures, the ones that are like everybody's posing for the professional photographer? Like in their clothes?
I would say that probably half of them were a pose either in front of a professional photographer or a great uncle of mine who was an excellent photographer.
Oh, wow.
And then there are a few that are just like pictures of the working conditions where the men worked, and the railroad tracks where the kids used as their playground area. The labor camp stood next to the railroad yard and the railroad tracks for roughly 40 years.
Wow.
And so some of the pictures are kids in their playground, if you will.
Wow. So this is an immigrant story at the beginning,
Yes.
and then it becomes a working family story, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so I think that this is kind of like the same as many immigrant families right now, right? It's like there's an
That's
immigrant
correct.
story, and then it becomes a working family story, right? Like one of the common denominators in the Latino community is hard work. You
Yes.
know, everyone
Yes.
identifies with it, is this work ethic that everybody has. Whenever you ask people that have Latinos that work for them, they're like, they're so hardworking. It's like, this is like the one thing that we all know how to do. It's like hard work.
Yes.
And it just feels like it has been going on for, you know, you just said 6 generations, right? It's like for 6 generations, Latinos have come here and worked their butts off
Yes.
in one way or the
Yes.
other, in some sort of, you know, hardship, sometimes like really hard conditions, just because they came from nothing or they came with
Yes.
nothing. And they
nothing.
have to just sort of rebuild their lives because of some sort of, in your family's case, there was a war going on.
Yes. Yes.
So it's kind of
And-
like it's kind of like history keeps repeating itself over and over and over again.
Yeah. My family, my mother's family, was able to ease away from the really hardship of the railroad immigrants. My grandfather continued to work for the railroad into the mid-60s, but they had actually moved out of the work camp in 1942, just before World War II. The key there was that for my mother was that she went beyond the work camp school and went to public high school in Dodge City. She graduated in 1938. She was one
Nice.
of maybe 3 or 4 Mexicans who graduated in her class. And that education enabled her to lead our family in pursuit of education with all of her kids and make sure they all graduated from high school. And we were all able to step away from the harsh realities of the hard life that people were still living in the 50s and 60s. So, and that is why I put in the title of the book that we had some success in that we left behind that really harsh work.
Yeah. And you know, that's kind of very forward thinking. Like I remember, you know, when I was told that my great grandfather, you know, back also in the, you know, late 1800s, early 1900s, decided that every single one of his children would go to school with like university, including
Wow.
all the women.
Mhm.
And
Wow.
that was extremely forward thinking because,
Yes.
you know, you
Yes.
never know which one of your children is the one that is going to take the family out of poverty or
Yes.
like help the family move forward. And it could very much be a woman.
Yes, absolutely. My mother set the example for the rest of her siblings that followed her. My mother was my grandmother's first child. And so now, not all of my aunts and uncles finished high school, but at least half of the 10 did. And at least 4 earned college degrees. And so their story and their educational stories also in Las Madres, and you can see the success coming, even though my great grandmother did not get to see it, even though great grandfather didn't get to see it. That's what they were working for.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I really see in our community. It's like you're really thinking like in a generational kind of way. It's not this like instant gratification. You kind of
Yes.
you're kind of like working towards like, okay, one day, you
Yes.
know, one of, you know, maybe 2 generations down the line, then
Yes.
the people that are following me are going to be doing okay. And that is
Yes.
like that is such a it's a different way of thinking. Like Asians, like Japanese or Chinese people think that way in like long term. Like
yes.
I'm going to work now for something, because they're such old cultures. But I also think that we have inherited that from like our indigenous past, right? Or for indigenous ancestors, that it's like we think also in this long term, like we are going to work towards maybe something that I'm never going to see.
Yes.
And I also think that maybe that is what like really drives us all the time forward. Like, okay, maybe things are not great now, but I'm going to work really hard so my kids have a better life, and then my grandkids have a better life. Or I mean, I don't have any children, but I'm working really hard so another Latina like me that comes along in 50 years doesn't have the same struggles that I do. So it's sort of like this.
Exactly. And I think that I want people who read Las Madres, and what I personally felt was when I have difficult times, even if it's as simple as getting out of bed when it's real cold, I stop and think what my great-grandmother did, my mom did, the cold wooden huts with the wind blowing right through. Going to the bathroom, you had to walk outside in the middle of the winter, and hey, get up. Don't be lazy, man. You have it made compared to what your family experienced. Yeah. And so I wanted to also inspire today's young people and say, yes, it's hard. And as you mentioned at the start of your show, we are in hard times, but we'll get up, face the challenge, we'll get through this.
Yeah. And also think about, to your point, think about everything that your ancestors have sacrificed for you to be there, for us to be here.
Yes, absolutely.
Like we are the representation of that. And it's like, what are we going to choose to do? Did our ancestors choose to take it and that's it? Did they just lay down and take it? Did they, what are we going to choose? Right? So it's like, to your point, that's, you make the getting out of the bed, but that also extrapolates to so many other things, right? Like,
sure.
Did my grandma just like sit there and just take it, or did the rest of your uncles or aunts, did they go to school and just left it there? It's kind of like, what is it that we're going to be doing with what we were given?
Yes, absolutely. My mother's first 8 years of school was a segregated school. Mexicans, and then everybody else on the other side of town had their schools. But the men from the work camp, the young men, the new generation, they had to go fight World War II. And when they came back, they said, no, we didn't go fight to come back to this. We want things to change. They organized, they made education a priority in their organizational activities. And I put in the book, one of the organizations was the American GI Forum. This was a veterans group that the organization originated in Texas, but it was World War II vets who then began to go to the school districts, go to the legislators and say, hey, we want our kids to be in school. We no longer want to be barred from going to the public swimming pool. We do not want to no longer be forced to sit in the balcony at the theaters, Mexicans only. And so so not only did they do the hard work, but after working on the weekends, they were in those organizations fighting for and demanding social justice. And so in today's times, we have to think of the challenge that they had and met. And we need to look at ourselves and say, okay, what are we going to do?
Yeah. Because they also said, we went to fight in a war representing this country.
That's correct.
there's Latinos that went and fought and died for the United States.
Yes.
They came back from a war and then they said, this is how you're treating me?
Yes, that's exactly.
And it's
what
the
took
same
place.
now.
Yes.
Still, Latinos still go to war, fight and die for this country. We help build, the railroad. We help build your houses. We help build so many things, and you still treat us this way.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, we need to do something about this.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is to make sure that the entire community knows the story. And in the Midwest, and where I was born and raised, that story was kind of quiet. Nobody talked about the two boys who were from the work camp that were killed in Europe. Nobody talks about a couple of men who came back injured from that war. Those kind of contributions that the Mexican community made in that little Midwest town, they're kind of hidden. And so one of the things that we can do as part of putting a stop to being ignored, disrespected, is to use local media, social media, movies, television stories, scripts, books, and make the other people who are unaware aware of the Constitution, of the contribution, and make them respect the contribution and alter their attitudes, their stereotypes, and welcome us into first-class citizenship.
Yeah, because we're just like them. We're humans too.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's just start with the basics.
Yeah.
We're humans too.
Yeah.
But also, I to add to what all the amazing things that you just said, the people power, right? The community power. I feel like sometimes Latinos nowadays have felt very divided, among, values, faiths, color, language, generational stuff, where they're from, or, all of this has created so many factions within our community. And it's really, we don't have time for this.
That's right. We don't.
This is exactly where they want us. They want us divided, fighting against each other, using the community power, using the fact that we're all Latinos and we all deserve the same things, and fighting for each other. It's not an us against them. It's us to try to uplift each other. There's no against anything. We're just trying to be together, all humans together, just humans.
Yes, it is part of being from two different cultures. There's in my situation, there's the Mexican culture, and then the non-Mexican, non-Latino culture. And the challenge is to mix together, take the best of each, enjoy whichever one you like.
Yeah.
But to do it in a way that serves the common good, that serves the people of the community. And so that means sometimes we're going to have to step into arenas that we're unfamiliar with and make us nervous. But we have to do that in order to begin to knock down those walls that people put up to keep us apart.
Yeah. We have to see it the way it is. Let's stop looking at the 2 centimeters in front of us. Let's look at the white picture and see what they're doing to all of us. What they're saying about all of us.
Yes.
And again, the instant gratification that we've inherited from other cultures. Let's go back to that long vision of like, let's fight for, the kids that, for your kids, for the kids that are coming after you, for the generations that are going to be living here, because we're going to be living here.
Yes.
And let's fight for those too. Maybe things might not, look super great right now, but we've made it work before.
Well, I take refuge in the thought that when the Europeans first arrived in 1492, there was in the centuries that followed, there has been a lot of subjugation where there was a dominant nation or tribe, whatever you want to call it, and they tried to use other people's for their benefit at the expense of the other people's.
Yeah.
And on the indigenous of America and others as well, who even in Europe, people are subjugated, like the Irish and the English and all that history. Mm-hmm. But we have to remind ourselves that the indigenous, our ancestors, have survived 5 centuries of that. We are now into our 6th century of people trying to make us subservient. But we're still here. We're doing better. This is a rough patch, but we'll get through this.
Yes. I mean, I don't know what to follow up with that. We'll get through this, guys. We will get through this.
That's right. Yes.
All right. I think this is all the time that we have for today. Please go out and read Las Madres Latinas in the Heartland Who Led Their Family to Success. We all need some uplifting good stories, especially from some abuelita and bisabuelita. Yeah. Where we love those. We love the bisabuelitas and the abuelitas. So please go out and read it. Dennis, thank you so much for sharing these amazing stories. You're such a great storyteller. I was like enthralled.
Oh, great.
Most of the time, just like, tell me more.
Well, can I add that you can buy the book online at the University Press of Kansas or Amazon or any other online bookseller. My social media, all of it is Dr. Garcia author. So at any social media that you use, you can find my website and learn more about the history of the Mexicanos who laid the railroad down across the Midwest. I might add one last thing.
Yeah.
If you ride the train from Chicago to California, you might be on rails that my family put down.
Yeah. And if you're a Mexican American from Kansas, you might be going over rails that your family built too. So
yes, that's right. That's right.
So go out and read this book. This may give you some insight or maybe inspire you to also research into your own family. I mean, I know my dad is doing the same thing. He's been researching our family. Like this is like his retirement project. It's great.
Okay.
It's kind of fun.
All right.
Well,
thank you, Clemencia, for having me.
Thank you, Dennis, so much. And then to get in touch with me, you know where I am at Chancleta Generation on the Instagrams, on the TikToks. And if you need to get in touch with me to talk about anything at all, guys, email me at clem@chancletageneration.com. If you like this podcast, share it, give us a rating, and we will be back with some more resources for our community, more uplifting stories. We need some good stories, good news, and we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.